as I'm switching between square and circle, I think it's a little confusing now with all those oscillators that we put here in the main. So I'm going to start stripping out some of these sine waves. I'm going to just make size and stroke size equal to their values. Also stroke color, rounding. I still think maybe position, I'll spread it out just so it's a little easier to see. But then also I think the fill color I'm just going to reduce to just a pure fill color with my square. Just while we're testing the blend modes, I think this will be a lot easier to kind of see what's going on. I'm also going to increase the size a little bit just so we can see this nice overlapping. So I can see over is working and I can see add is working correctly. Next I want to get multiply working. I also notice as I go from square to circle, I've got one more air in here. And the air is right here. I'm adding stroke size to the size side of step instead of the circle size of step, which I can see was what I'm doing down here. So I'm going to copy those and paste those there. And there we go. And then my stroke, I believe that has to be, yeah, there we go. I had one more error. I was adding the outer to the inner. And of course I want to subtract the inner from the outer. And to test this, I also just put some hard values in here. So let me reduce those in that function back to fill color, stroke color. There we go. So if you were getting some funky results with your ellipse function and you were copying my code exactly, that's why. Okay, so I think now we're ready to build the multiply blend mode. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually come in here to my code, and with this drop down, I'm going to make a third option. So add, over, and blend. I'm going to come in here to add, and let's add a second value. And on over, let's add a new label. Let's take a look at what that looks like. We've got add, great, over, and multiply. And multiply isn't doing anything because those are testing false in my conditional here in my main loop. So let's come down to our main loop and let's add another else if statement. And we want if blend mode is equal to 2. And then some stuff. Now, oh, I wish it was this easy to just say color multiply by shape. But we can see right away that doesn't work. And if you think about it, there's a reason this doesn't work is because when you're multiplying, you're getting a smaller value because everything is less than 1. You're also multiplying against quite a lot of zeros in here. And when you multiply against a 0, well, your result is a 0. So this isn't going to work. It's not as simple as add. And this kind of makes sense if you think about it. I've put a little diagram here in Illustrator so we can kind of think about maybe what is happening and what we want to have happen. So let's say this is literally kind of what our vec3 would be returning, right, with a stroke and a fill, and then the alpha might look like this around it. And we're adding maybe another layer on top, but that's not really the effect that we want when we do multiply. When we do multiply, we probably want something that looks like this. When we take this second shape and then move it over the first shape, where there's an intersection, instead of it adding to the value, it actually gets darker. This is because if you're adding, think about it. You adding when you add two values, you get a larger value, like 0.25 plus 0.25 would be 0.5. But if you're multiplying two values less than 1, you'll get a smaller value, 0.5 times 0.5. Like let's say these guys are just 50% gray by 50% gray. You're actually going to get like 25% gray, right? And so that's a big hint right there that we need to, notice as I flip this back over to black, we can see things go wrong. And that's a big hint that for multiply to work, we're going to need all the surrounding areas to be 1s instead of 0s. If we multiply with a bunch of 0s, then, which and that's black, of course, then that's just going to wipe out our picture pretty quickly. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get a copy of the alpha channel, which would look something like this. and we need to flip the whole thing to white on black. So like this should be white and this should be black. So if we flip the whole thing and just inverted it, that would look like this. And then if we added it to our shape, roughly, that would look like this. So this is what we need to make. So let's do that. So let's go ahead and let's make a copy of our alpha, and I'm going to call it the mat. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull out the shape.alpha. And to invert it, of course, we know to invert things, we just, if they're less than 1, we just subtract them from 1.0. And then let's go ahead and let's add it to the shapes.rgb. We are then going to add the mat. So that's going to add all that white around. So that gives us that. And then we just need to multiply it with our accumulation, which would be something like that. And so when these whites all get multiplied against one another, that'll be 1 times 1, which will still equal 1. This will all be 1 times 1. This will all be 1 times 1. So that'll all be the same. The only thing we're interested in here is this intersection, which should give us these lower values. So that's going to be color, the RGB, and now we can multiply it times our shape.rgb. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to calculate the alpha for both of these things and add them together and accumulate them, right? Like we need to take the alpha that we're building with the shape and the alpha that we're building with color and add them together. And so that should be just as simple as taking colors.alpha and adding the shape.alpha. So that's going to build our alpha channel. Okay, so let's save that and let's see what that returns us. Come back here. Okay, so that's interesting. That's giving us the alpha is returning correctly, but we're still getting all this kind of like blackness in here. And this is because we need to, there's one last place we need to flip it over to white. And of course, this makes sense too. This took me a second, but I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'm still multiplying against 0 to begin with. And if our operation down here is a multiplication, we're starting with something that's white, and then it's flipping to black right away because we're multiplying against a bunch of zeros. So for multiply blend mode to work, we need to, of course, color needs to start with an all white color. And so you'd say color.rgb is equal to vec3 1.0. And now we don't want to flip the alpha. The alpha still needs to build an alpha channel, so it still needs to start with 0 and then it accumulates like normal. It's just the RGB that's going to start with white. And there we go, sure enough, it works. So if I change the stroke size of these guys, I change the size of these guys, we can see where it overlaps. It gets darker, and it's a little easier to see too. Maybe if I choose a color that's, there we go, got less brightness in it, and we can really see that that is getting darker. Now, of course, the problem is, I've adjusted for this to be white, but then if I go back to add mode, that's going to blow everything out to add because we're starting with white instead of black. So I'm just going to build a simple conditional here, one more place. If stroke color, or excuse me, if blend mode is equal to 2, then reset the RGB to white. There we go. So 2, 1, 0. We've got our 3 blend modes working in here. That's cool. So this is going to be, I'm not going to do any more blend modes than these 3 for this demo, but I'm going to let you know that if you fire up VDMX, you will notice there are a lot of blend modes inside VDMX. Like if I come here to VDMX and I come up here to my layer, and let me just inspect my layer. Right here where it says composition mode, if you go into GLSL, you see all these fragment shaders. See all of these? So actually all these are a bunch of different blend modes. And if you want to look up the formulas for all of these, you most certainly can. If you look inside the VDMX, come here to VDMX, come to preferences, and I'm going to come to user paths, and as you can see here, here's all my stuff basically for VDMX resources, where your quartz composer, compositions, number effects, chains, etc. are stored here. And so I'm going to show that in the Finder, and that brings that up. It says VDMX. I'm going to come in here and take a look at all of this stuff that's been saved, and a lot of these are Quartz Composer effects. But I'm looking for my GLSL comp modes. And look at all these. Look at this. This is like Christmas morning. Look at all these formula that I can use as blend modes here. I should be able to borrow all these. So let's just, as an example, let's go ahead and save this here. And I'm going to come in here and just add those GLSL comp modes here. And let's take a look at some of these now. Okay, that's causing me an error because of the, let's see. Okay, so there's no, these are just fragment shaders. They're actually not ISF format. There's no blob basically at the top, but that's okay. We can just come in here and take a look at these formula, and you can see these functions, right? Like composite bottom and top, and you'll notice that these are fairly well labeled. You can see some of these different formula for making different blend modes, and you can feel free to kind of implement these in the ShapeMaker. As I mentioned, I'm probably just going to do these three basic ones just for these demos. These are also kind of three simple and easy to understand and most commonly used blend modes. But if you want to implement any of the rest of these, there you go.